Marcus Henderson never thought a simple banking transaction would change his life forever. Standing in line at First National Bank on a quiet Tuesday morning, he was just another face in the crowd, until security guard Patricia Ruiz spotted something on his wrist that made her blood run cold. What she saw wasn't just ink on skin. It was a symbol that connected Marcus to a case that had haunted the Chicago Police Department for over 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of First National Bank cast their usual harsh glow across the marble floor as Marcus Henderson shuffled forward in the customer service line. It was 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the bank held that particular stillness that comes with mid-morning business hours. Busy enough to have a line, quiet enough to hear every cough and whispered phone conversation echoing off the high ceilings. Marcus checked his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. His construction crew was expecting him back on the job site by noon, and this deposit should have been a quick 15-minute errand. Instead, he found himself trapped behind an elderly woman who seemed to be conducting what sounded like her entire financial portfolio review with the teller. He rolled up the sleeves of his flannel shirt, the October chill from outside finally wearing off in the bank's stuffy interior. The motion was automatic, something he'd done thousands of times without thinking. But today, that simple gesture would set in motion a chain of events that would unravel secrets buried for over a decade. Patricia Ruiz had been working security at First National for 8 years. At 52, she'd seen every type of customer imaginable, from nervous first-time account holders to suspicious characters trying to cash questionable checks. Her background in law enforcement, 12 years with Chicago PD before a knee injury forced her into private security, had given her an eye for details that others missed. She was positioned near the entrance, her usual spot where she could observe both the front doors and the teller area. Her attention was split between monitoring the parking lot through the large windows and keeping an eye on the customers inside when something caught her peripheral vision. Marcus had shifted his weight, adjusting his grip on the deposit envelope, and that's when Patricia saw it. At first, it was just a flash of black ink on pale skin. Tattoos were common enough that they barely registered in her consciousness anymore, but something about this particular marking made her look twice. Her blood went cold. The tattoo was small, no bigger than a silver dollar, positioned on the inside of Marcus's left wrist. To most people, it would have looked like an abstract design, interlocking geometric shapes forming a pattern that could have been Celtic, could have been tribal, could have been anything. But Patricia knew exactly what it was, because she'd seen it before, not in person, but in crime scene photographs that had been burned into her memory during the most frustrating case of her police career. The Riverside Strangler case had dominated Chicago headlines from 2007 to 2009. 5 victims, all found along the Chicago River, all bearing the same mysterious marking carved into their skin. The killer had a signature. He would carve this exact symbol into his victims' left shoulders before dumping their bodies. The case had consumed Patricia's life for 2 years, along with dozens of other detectives, FBI profilers, and forensic experts. They never caught him. The case went cold in late 2009 when the murders suddenly stopped. No leads, no suspects, no resolution. Just 5 families left without answers and a police department haunted by their failure. Patricia had been one of the lead detectives on the case, and its unsolved status had been one of the contributing factors to her eventual departure from the force. Now, 15 years later, she was staring at that same symbol, but this time it was tattooed on a living person's wrist. Marcus felt someone watching him and glanced around the bank. His eyes met those of the security guard, a middle-aged Hispanic woman whose intense stare made him uncomfortable. She wasn't just casually observing. She was studying him with the kind of focus that made his skin crawl. He'd encountered that look before, usually from cops who thought he looked like trouble. He self-consciously tugged his sleeve down, covering the tattoo. The gesture wasn't lost on Patricia, who felt her heart rate spike. Why would he hide it unless he knew what it meant? Patricia's mind raced through possibilities. The simplest explanation was that this was just a coincidence. Some guy with a tattoo that happened to resemble the killer's signature. But in her experience, coincidences like this didn't exist in the world of violent crime. Either this man was connected to the Riverside Strangler case, or he knew someone who was. She needed to get a better look at the tattoo, but Marcus had covered it completely. Now his arms crossed defensively as he continued waiting in line. Patricia moved closer, pretending to adjust the velvet rope that guided the queue, positioning herself where she could observe him more directly. Marcus was 28 years old, with the build of someone who worked with his hands for a living. His jeans were worn and paint-stained, his work boots scuffed and practical. Everything about him screamed blue-collar, honest workers, but Patricia had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. Some of the most dangerous people she'd encountered had looked completely ordinary. The tattoo itself posed questions that made Patricia's detective instincts surge back to life. If this man was the Riverside Strangler, why would he tattoo his signature on his own body? It seemed like an incredibly stupid move for someone who had successfully evaded capture for over a decade. Serial killers were often narcissistic, but they weren't usually suicidal. On the other hand, if he wasn't the killer, how had he gotten that exact design? The details of the symbol had never been released to the public. The police had deliberately held back that information, knowing that false confessions and copycat crimes were common in high-profile cases. Only the killer, the victims, the police, and the medical examiner's office knew the precise details of that marking. Patricia's radio crackled to life with routine security chatter, but she barely heard it. Her full attention was focused on Marcus, who had finally reached the front of the line. She watched as he approached the teller window, his movements casual and unhurried. If he was nervous about her scrutiny, he wasn't showing it. "Good morning," Marcus said to the teller, a young woman named Sarah who had worked at the bank for about 6 months. "I need to make a deposit to my business account." He handed over the envelope and his ID, the same routine he'd performed dozens of times before. Sarah smiled and began processing the transaction, asking the usual questions about whether he wanted cash back or a receipt. Normal, everyday banking business. But Patricia wasn't seeing a normal customer anymore. She was seeing a potential connection to the case that had defined and ultimately ended her police career. Every instinct she'd developed over 12 years of law enforcement was screaming at her to act, but she also knew she couldn't just accuse a random bank customer of being a serial killer based on a tattoo. She needed more information, and she needed it without alerting Marcus to her suspicions. Patricia quietly moved to the customer service desk and picked up the phone, pretending to make a routine security call while actually scrolling through her personal contacts. She still had friends in the Chicago PD, people who would remember the Riverside Strangler case as clearly as she did. Detective Raymond Walsh had been her partner during the investigation. He'd retired 3 years ago, but Patricia knew he still consulted on cold cases. If anyone would want to know about this potential development, it would be Ray. Marcus completed his transaction and turned away from the teller window. As he walked toward the exit, Patricia got one more glimpse of his wrist as he reached for the door handle. The sleeve rode up just enough for her to confirm what she'd seen earlier. It was definitely the same symbol, executed with precise detail that suggested either intimate knowledge of the original or access to crime scene information that had never been made public. The bell above the door chimed as Marcus left the bank, and Patricia felt a moment of panic. She couldn't let him just walk away, not when he might be the key to solving the case that had haunted her for 15 years. But she also couldn't abandon her post or confront him without backup and proper authority. She watched through the window as Marcus climbed into a white pickup truck with Henderson Construction painted on the side. At least now she had a name and a business to trace. The license plate was partially obscured by mud, but she could make out enough digits to run a partial search if needed. Patricia's hands shook slightly as she dialed Ray Walsh's number. After all these years, the Riverside Strangler case might finally be breaking open. But as she waited for the call to connect, a nagging doubt crept into her mind. What if Marcus Henderson wasn't the monster they'd been hunting? What if he was just another victim of circumstances beyond his control? The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, before Ray's familiar gravelly voice answered. "Walsh here. Ray, it's Patricia Ruiz. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think I just saw our guy from the Riverside case." Detective Raymond Walsh was enjoying his retirement morning routine, coffee, crossword puzzle, and the blessed silence of a life no longer ruled by radio calls and crime scenes, when Patricia's voice brought him crashing back to 2008. "Slow down, Patricia," Ray said, setting his coffee mug on the kitchen table with a trembling hand. You're telling me someone walked into your bank with the exact Riverside symbol tattooed on his wrist? Ray, I'm not imagining this. I stared at those crime scene photos for 2 years straight. I could draw that symbol in my sleep. Patricia's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty mixed with barely contained excitement. Marcus Henderson drives a white pickup with Henderson Construction on the side. He's about 28, which would make him 13 when the murders started, Ray finished, his detective mind automatically calculating. That's young, but not impossible. Some of them start early. He paused, the familiar rhythm of case analysis taking over despite his civilian status. Patricia, you need to be very careful here. If this guy is unsolved, he's managed to stay hidden for 15 years. That takes intelligence and control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Patricia watched Marcus's truck disappear around the corner onto Michigan Avenue. What's our next move? I can't exactly follow him in my security uniform. Our next move is nothing, Ray said firmly. Your next move is to call Detective Lisa Chen at Area 3. She's heading up the cold case unit now, and she's a good person. Tell her everything you told me, but don't do anything else. Don't investigate on your own, don't try to track this guy down, and definitely don't approach him. But even as Ray gave this advice, both former cops knew how impossible it would be to just walk away. The Riverside Strangler had been their white whale, the case that proved not every monster gets caught, not every family gets closure. Now, after 15 years of silence, a potential lead had literally walked through Patricia's workplace. Meanwhile, Marcus Henderson was completely unaware that his simple banking errand had just reopened one of Chicago's most notorious cold cases. He drove his pickup through the Tuesday morning traffic, his mind focused on the foundation work his crew needed to complete before the weather turned. The Henderson construction job site was a new residential development in Lincoln Park, the kind of upscale housing project that kept his small business profitable. Marcus had started the company 5 years ago with 2 trucks, a handful of tools, and a work ethic inherited from his father. Now he employed 12 people and had more work than he could handle. It was the American dream in action, built on 14-hour days, and the kind of physical labor that left him exhausted but satisfied. He pulled into the construction site and immediately noticed the tension in his crew's posture. His foreman, Danny Kowalski, approached the truck with the expression of someone delivering bad news. "Boss, we have a problem," Danny said as Marcus climbed out. "The city inspector showed up an hour ago. Says there's an issue with our permits for the electrical work." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Permit issues could shut down a job for weeks, and weeks of delay meant thousands of dollars in penalties and lost wages for his crew. What kind of issue? Something about the drawings not matching the filed plans. The inspector says we need to halt all work until it gets sorted out. Danny handed him a yellow stop work order. "I tried calling the architect's office, but they're saying it's not their problem." This was exactly the kind of bureaucratic nightmare that could destroy a small business. Marcus had put everything he owned into Henderson Construction, and jobs like this one were what kept him afloat. He couldn't afford delays, especially not on a project this size. "Get the crew started on the cleanup," Marcus said, his mind already working through solutions. "I'll head downtown and sort this out in person. Sometimes these things get resolved faster when you're standing in front of someone's desk." As Marcus drove toward City Hall, Detective Lisa Chen was reviewing Patricia Ruiz's phone call with the kind of skeptical attention that came from years of chasing false leads. Cold cases attracted all kinds of attention: psychics, amateur detectives, conspiracy theorists, and well-meaning citizens who saw connections that didn't exist. But Patricia's law enforcement background gave her credibility, and her description of the tattoo was disturbingly specific. Chen pulled up the digital case files from the Riverside Strangler investigation, photographs she'd studied many times since taking over the cold case unit. The symbol was distinctive, 3 interlocking crescents forming a pattern that looked almost like a stylized flower or star, depending on the angle. The killer had carved it into each victim's left shoulder with surgical precision, using what the medical examiner had determined was likely a custom-made blade. It wasn't a symbol that appeared in any known gang markings, religious iconography, or popular tattoo designs. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had theorized that it was the killer's personal signature, possibly something with deep psychological meaning to him. Chen had worked dozens of cold cases, and she knew that genuine breaks were rare. Most tips led nowhere. Most new witnesses had faulty memories. Most breakthroughs were dead ends dressed up as hope. But something about Patricia's call felt different. Maybe it was the precision of her description, or maybe it was the simple fact that she hadn't asked for anything. No reward money, no publicity, no vindication of some personal theory. Martinez, Chen called to her partner, Detective Carlos Martinez, who was working at the next desk. Remember that Riverside Strangler case from 07 to 09? The one with the carved symbols? Quote. Martinez looked up from his computer screen. The cold one that drove Walsh and his partner crazy? Yeah, what about it? Got a call from a former CPD working bank security. Says she saw someone with that exact symbol tattooed on his wrist. Chen forwarded Patricia's contact information to Martinez's computer. Want to take a ride out to First National and have a conversation? While Chen and Martinez prepared to follow up on Patricia's tip, Marcus was discovering that bureaucracy moved at its own glacial pace regardless of how urgent his problem felt. The permit office at City Hall was a maze of fluorescent-lit corridors and numbered windows, each staffed by civil servants who seemed to take personal satisfaction in explaining why his problem was actually someone else's department's responsibility. By 2 p.m., Marcus had been shuffled between 4 different offices, each one requiring him to fill out new forms and provide documentation he'd already provided to the previous office. His construction crew was sitting idle, costing him money by the hour, and the permit issue seemed no closer to resolution. The stress was getting to him. Marcus found himself unconsciously rubbing his left wrist, a nervous habit he'd developed over the years. The tattoo underneath his sleeve had been there for so long that he rarely thought about it anymore, but stressful situations seemed to make him more aware of it. He'd gotten the tattoo on his 18th birthday, a decision that felt meaningful at the time but had become just another part of his body over the years. The design came from a sketchbook his older brother Kevin had left behind, and getting it inked felt like keeping a piece of his brother with him. Kevin had been the artist in the family, always drawing strange geometric patterns and abstract designs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his imagination. Kevin had been dead for 12 years now, a victim of the kind of violent crime that plagued certain neighborhoods in Chicago. The case had never been solved. Just another statistic in a city that saw too much violence. Marcus rarely talked about his brother anymore, but the tattoo served as a private memorial, a way of carrying Kevin's memory without having to explain the pain to anyone else. At 2:47 p.m., Detectives Chen and Martinez walked into the First National Bank and asked to speak with Patricia Ruiz. The security guard's hands were visibly shaking as she led them to a small office behind the customer service area. I've been thinking about this all day, Patricia said before either detective could speak. What if I'm wrong? What if this is just some guy with a tattoo that happens to look similar? Chen studied Patricia's face, looking for signs of doubt or uncertainty that might undermine her credibility. Instead, she saw the focused intensity of an experienced cop who had seen something important. Tell us exactly what you observed. From the beginning. Patricia walked them through the morning's events, describing Marcus's appearance, his behavior, and most importantly, the tattoo itself. She provided details that convinced Chen this wasn't a case of mistaken identity or wishful thinking. The symbol was exact, Patricia concluded. Not similar, not close. Exact. Same proportions, same interlocking pattern, same placement on the wrist that would correspond to where the killer carved it on the victim's shoulders. Martinez leaned forward. Did this Henderson guy seem nervous, like he knew you were watching him? He noticed me staring, and he covered the tattoo when he realized I was looking. But that could just be normal self-consciousness. People don't like being stared at. Patricia paused. There was something else, though. When I was walking him through the transaction, I heard him tell the teller his name, Marcus Henderson. The way he said it, it sounded natural, comfortable, not like someone using a fake identity. Chen and Martinez exchanged glances. If Marcus Henderson was the Riverside Strangler, using his real name for business transactions suggested either incredible arrogance or genuine innocence. Serial killers who evaded capture for 15 years typically didn't advertise their identities. We're going to need to take this step by step, Chen said. First, we ran a full background check on Marcus Henderson and Henderson Construction. Then we see if we can establish any connections between him and the original victims or crime scenes. As the detectives began their preliminary investigation, Marcus finally reached the right office in City Hall. The permit supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Janet Morrison, actually seemed interested in solving his problem rather than passing it along to someone else. "Your paperwork looks fine to me," Morrison said after reviewing his files. "This might be a miscommunication with the field inspector. Let me make a phone call and see if we can get this cleared up." For the first time all day, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope that his nightmare might have a simple resolution. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside Morrison's office and checked his phone for messages from his crew. Danny had texted that they'd finished the cleanup and were standing by for instructions. Marcus had no idea that 50 miles away, 2 detectives were running his name through criminal databases and comparing his photograph to composite sketches that had gathered dust for over a decade. He was simply a contractor trying to get back to work, completely unaware that his morning banking trip had made him the prime suspect in one of Chicago's most notorious unsolved cases. Detective Chen's computer screen displayed the results of Marcus Henderson's background check at 4:23 p.m. What she found wasn't the criminal history of a serial killer, but the life story of someone who had overcome significant tragedy. No arrests, no violent incidents, not even a traffic violation in the past 3 years. His credit score was excellent, his business license is current, and his tax records showed the steady growth of a legitimate construction company. "Martinez, look at this," Chen said, pointing to a police report from 2012. Marcus Henderson was the victim of a home invasion robbery. 3 suspects broke into his apartment, beat him unconscious, and stole everything valuable. He spent 2 days in the hospital. Martinez read over her shoulder. "Doesn't sound like our serial killer profile. Victims don't usually become perpetrators in cases like this." He paused at another entry. "Here's something interesting, though. His brother Kevin Henderson died in 2013. Unsolved homicide in Humboldt Park." Chen clicked on Kevin Henderson's case file. The 26-year-old had been found stabbed to death in an alley behind an art supply store. No witnesses, no suspects, no arrests. Just another cold case in a city full of them. "Kevin Henderson was an artist," Chen read aloud. "Freelance graphic designer, sold paintings at local galleries. According to the investigating officers, he was known for creating abstract geometric designs." She looked at Martinez. "What if the tattoo design came from the brothers' artwork?" Before Martinez could respond, Chen's phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia Ruiz's number. "Detective Chen, I'm sorry to bother you, but Marcus Henderson just came back to the bank." Patricia's voice was tight with nervous energy. "He's at the customer service desk right now, and I can see the tattoo clearly. I also overheard him talking to the manager about some kind of permit problem with the city." Chen grabbed her jacket. "Don't do anything, Patricia. Don't approach him, don't stare, just act normal. We're 15 minutes away." As Chen and Martinez raced toward the bank, Marcus was experiencing the relief that comes with bureaucratic problems finally getting solved. Janet Morrison had called the field inspector and discovered that the permit issue was a clerical error. Someone had entered the wrong project address into the computer system, causing the plans to be compared against a completely different building. "Your permits are fine, Mr. Henderson," Morrison had told him. "I'll fax the correction to your job site immediately. You can resume work first thing tomorrow morning." Now Marcus was at the bank's customer service desk, depositing the check he'd received from his client for the completed foundation work. The money would cover his crew's wages and keep Henderson Construction solvent for another month. After the stress of the permit crisis, this felt like a major victory. Patricia watched him from her security post, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to confront him directly. Her law enforcement training told her to wait for backup, but her personal investment in the Riverside case made patience almost impossible. This man might be connected to the murders that had defined her career, and he was standing 20 feet away, completely unaware of her suspicions. Marcus completed his transaction and turned toward the exit, and that's when he noticed Patricia staring at him again. This time, her intensity was impossible to ignore. Their eyes met across the bank lobby, and Marcus saw something that made him uncomfortable. Recognition mixed with fear. "Excuse me," Marcus said, approaching Patricia's post. "Is there a problem? You've been watching me pretty closely." Patricia's heart hammered against her ribs. Every protocol said she should deflect, should wait for the detectives, and should not engage. But Marcus's direct approach caught her off guard. "No problem," she managed. "Just doing my job." Marcus studied her face. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" Quote, "I don't think so," Patricia lied, but something in her expression must have betrayed her because Marcus's demeanor shifted. The friendly contractor disappeared, replaced by someone more guarded and alert. "My name's Marcus Henderson," he said, extending his hand. "I run Henderson Construction." Patricia shook his hand reluctantly. "Patricia Ruiz." "Ruiz," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "That name does sound familiar. Were you ever a cop?" The question hit Patricia like a physical blow. How could he know that unless he had reason to research Chicago police officers? Unless he had reason to know who had worked the Riverside case? "Why would you ask that?" Patricia's voice came out sharper than she intended. Marcus shrugged, but his eyes never left her face. "Just got that feeling. My brother used to say I was good at reading people." He paused. "My brother Kevin. He was killed about 12 years ago. The case never got solved." The mention of Kevin's murder threw Patricia completely off balance. She remembered the case vaguely, one of hundreds of unsolved homicides that crossed her desk during her years in homicide. But the timing was wrong for the Riverside connection. Kevin Henderson had died in 2013, 4 years after the serial murders stopped. "I'm sorry for your loss," Patricia said automatically. "Yeah, well, Chicago's a violent city," Marcus replied. "Lots of people die for no good reason." He rolled up his sleeve slightly, revealing the edge of his tattoo. "This is for Kevin. He designed it before he died. Called it his infinity symbol. Said it represented how energy never really disappears, just changes form." Patricia stared at the partially visible tattoo, her mind racing. If Marcus was telling the truth, if Kevin Henderson had designed this symbol as an original artwork, then the connection to the Riverside murders became even more mysterious. How had Kevin Henderson known the killer's signature 4 years before he became a victim himself? The bank's front door chimed, and Patricia saw Detectives Chen and Martinez entering. Marcus noticed her gaze shift and turned to see what had caught her attention. His expression darkened when he saw the two people in business attire moving purposefully through the lobby. "Those are cops," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. Patricia didn't deny it. "Detective Chen, Detective Martinez. This is Marcus Henderson." Chen approached with her badge visible. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Detective Chen with the Chicago Police Department. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a tattoo on your wrist." Marcus looked between the 3 people surrounding him, and Patricia saw the exact moment when understanding clicked into place. "This is about the Riverside murders, isn't it?" The admission stunned everyone. Chen had expected denials, confusion, maybe an attempt to flee. She hadn't expected Marcus Henderson to immediately identify the case they were investigating. "How do you know about the Riverside murders?" Chen asked carefully. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because my brother Kevin was investigating them when he died." He pulled up his sleeve completely, revealing the full tattoo. "This symbol? Kevin found it carved into a tree in Humboldt Park in 2012. He became obsessed with it, spent months researching its meaning, trying to figure out what it represented." Patricia felt the world shift around her. "Your brother was investigating the Riverside case?" "Kevin thought the murders were connected to something bigger," Marcus explained. "He'd found this symbol in 3 different locations around the city. Carved into trees, spray-painted on abandoned buildings, scratched into concrete. He thought the killer was still active, still leaving signs." Martinez stepped forward. "Did your brother share his research with the police?" "He tried," Marcus said bitterly. "Filed reports, called detectives, even went to the FBI field office. Everyone told him the case was closed, that he was seeing patterns that didn't exist. They treated him like some conspiracy theorist." Chen felt pieces of a larger puzzle starting to fall into place. "What happened to your brother's research?" "I have it all. Boxes of photos, maps, notes, sketches. After Kevin died, I got this tattoo to honor his memory and his work. I figured if the cops wouldn't listen to him while he was alive, maybe I could keep his investigation going somehow." The revelation changed everything. Marcus Henderson wasn't the Riverside Strangler. He was the brother of an amateur detective who might have been getting close to the truth when he was murdered. The symbol wasn't the killer's signature copied by a perpetrator. It was evidence of a pattern that Kevin Henderson had discovered independently. "Mr. Henderson," Chen said slowly, "we're going to need to see everything your brother collected, and we're going to need to reopen Kevin's murder case." Quote, Patricia watched Marcus's face as the implications sank in. His brother hadn't been the victim of random street violence. Kevin Henderson had been killed because he was getting too close to something someone wanted to keep buried. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. Kevin's final journal entry, the night before he died. He wrote that he'd figured out who the Riverside killer was. He was planning to meet with someone the next day to share his evidence. Chen and Martinez exchanged glances. After 15 years, the Riverside Strangler case wasn't just being reopened. It was exploding into something much larger than anyone had imagined. "We need to get you somewhere safe, Mr. Henderson," Chen said. "If your brother was killed to silence his investigation, then showing the tattoo publicly might have put you in danger too." As they prepared to leave the bank, Patricia realized that her moment of recognition in the customer line had done more than reopen a cold case. It had potentially identified the real reason Kevin Henderson died and put his brother Marcus in the crosshairs of a killer who had managed to stay hidden for over a decade. The Riverside Strangler wasn't finished. He was still out there, still watching, still willing to kill to protect his secrets. And now he knew that Kevin Henderson's brother was carrying on the investigation that had cost Kevin his life. Marcus Henderson had walked into First National Bank that morning as a simple contractor making a deposit. He was leaving as the key to solving one of Chicago's most notorious serial killer cases, and possibly the next target of a murderer who had already killed at least 6 people to keep his identity secret. The tattoo on his wrist wasn't just a memorial to his dead brother anymore. It was evidence, bait, and a death sentence all rolled into one small piece of ink that had taken 15 years to find its way to the right pair of eyes. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in an interview room at Area 3 headquarters, surrounded by Kevin's research materials that had been retrieved from a storage unit on the south side. Boxes of photographs, hand-drawn maps, and meticulously organized files covered every surface. Detective Chen had called in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and the room buzzed with the energy of a case suddenly breaking wide open. Agent Sarah Hoffman from Quantico spread Kevin's final map across the table. Red pins marked the locations where he'd found the symbol, creating a pattern that stretched across Chicago's north side. Blue pins showed the original Riverside murder sites. When overlaid, they formed a perfect spiral leading to a single address in Lincoln Park. "Your brother was brilliant," Agent Hoffman told Marcus. "He identified a hunting pattern that we missed completely. The killer wasn't randomly dumping bodies by the river. He was following a specific geographic sequence that meant something to him personally." Martinez pointed to Kevin's final journal entry, written in increasingly frantic handwriting. He says here that he traced the spiral's center to a specific building. 1247 North Cleveland Avenue, that's a residential address. Chen was already pulling up property records on her laptop. "The building is owned by Dr. Michael Brennan. He's been there since 2005. She paused, reading the screen. Dr. Brennan is a forensic pathologist. He worked for the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office during the original Riverside investigation. The revelation sent a chill through the room. Dr. Brennan had been one of the experts analyzing the killer's signature, studying the precise way the symbols were carved into victims' skin. He had access to crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and investigative details that were never released to the public. "Kevin figured it out," Marcus said quietly, staring at his brother's research. He realized the killer was someone with inside access to the investigation. That's why he was so frustrated when the police wouldn't listen. He was trying to tell them that the murderer was one of their own experts. Agent Hoffman studied the psychological profiles she'd compiled during the original investigation. Dr. Brennan fits the profile perfectly. Highly intelligent, detail-oriented, access to forensic tools, knowledge of police procedures. He could have been monitoring the investigation's progress and staying one step ahead the entire time. Chen's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it and frowned. "That's strange. Patricia Ruiz just texted me. She says a man matching Dr. Brennan's description was at the bank yesterday asking questions about Marcus." Marcus felt his blood go cold. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you were a regular customer, what time you usually came in, whether you lived in the neighborhood." Chen stood up abruptly. "We need to get you into protective custody immediately. If Brennan knows you're carrying on Kevin's investigation, he's going to try to eliminate the threat." But even as Chen spoke, her phone rang with Patricia's number. The security guard's voice was shaky with fear. "Detective Chen, you need to get down here right now. There's been an incident at the bank. Someone broke into our computer system and accessed all of Marcus Henderson's account information. They have his address, his business locations, everything. Agent Hoffman was already coordinating with the FBI's tactical team. We're too late for protective custody. If Brennan has Marcus's information, he's already making his move. We need to treat this as an active serial killer situation. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your brother should have minded his own business. Meet me at Humboldt Park tonight at midnight, same spot where Kevin died, or your construction crew starts disappearing one by one. The message included a photo of Danny Kowalski leaving the job site, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Dr. Brennan had been watching, planning, and positioning himself to finish what he'd started with Kevin's murder. He's using my crew as leverage, Marcus said, showing the phone to the agents. Danny's got 3 kids. I can't let anything happen to him because of Kevin's investigation. Chen studied the message. This is perfect. Brennan thinks he's controlling the situation, but he's actually walking into a trap. We'll set up surveillance around Humboldt Park and take him down when he shows up. Agent Hoffman shook her head. It's not that simple. Brennan has been successfully evading capture for 18 years. He's not going to just walk into an obvious police setup. He'll have contingency plans, escape routes, and probably weapons we haven't considered. Marcus looked at his brother's research one more time, focusing on a detail he'd overlooked before. Kevin had written extensive notes about Dr. Brennan's psychological state, analyzing interviews the pathologist had given to newspapers during the original investigation. Kevin thought Brennan was getting sloppy, Marcus said, reading from his brother's notebook. He'd started leaving the symbols in public places because he enjoyed the risk of being discovered. Kevin believed that Brennan wanted to be caught, but only on his own terms. Agent Hoffman nodded slowly. That fits the narcissistic personality type. He wants recognition for his intelligence, but he also wants to control the narrative of his capture. Meeting you at the site where he killed Kevin isn't just about eliminating a witness, it's about completing a pattern. Chen coordinated with tactical teams while Marcus prepared for what might be his final encounter with his brother's killer. The FBI outfitted him with body armor and surveillance equipment. But everyone knew that technology would only go so far against someone who had successfully murdered at least 6 people and evaded justice for nearly 2 decades. As darkness fell over Chicago, Marcus drove toward Humboldt Park with an FBI surveillance team following at a distance. The park held too many memories: family picnics with Kevin when they were children, late-night conversations about their dreams and ambitions, and finally, the spot where his brother's life had ended violently. Dr. Michael Brennan was already waiting when Marcus arrived. The forensic pathologist looked exactly like the newspaper photos from the original investigation: tall, thin, with graying hair, and the kind of precise movements that suggested someone comfortable with sharp instruments. You look like your brother, Brennan said as Marcus approached. Kevin was very persistent. I almost admired his dedication to solving a puzzle that wasn't meant to be solved. Marcus kept his distance, knowing that FBI snipers were positioned in the surrounding trees. Why did you kill him? He was just trying to find the truth. Brennan smiled with the kind of cold satisfaction that came from years of successful deception. The truth is overrated. Kevin's investigation threatened to expose work that took me decades to perfect. The Riverside murders weren't random violence. They were art. Each victim was carefully selected, each symbol precisely placed, each crime scene designed to challenge the intellectual capacity of law enforcement. And when they couldn't solve your puzzle, you stopped killing to protect yourself, Marcus said, trying to keep Brennan talking while the FBI moved into position. I never stopped, Brennan corrected. I simply became more sophisticated. The symbols your brother found around the city? Those marked future victims. People I'd identified and studied, waiting for the right moment to complete my work. The confession was exactly what the FBI needed, and Agent Hoffman's voice crackled through Marcus's hidden earpiece. We have enough. Move away from the target. Quote. But Dr. Brennan had spent 18 years anticipating this moment. As Marcus stepped backward, the pathologist produced a scalpel from his jacket, the same type of precision instrument he'd used to carve symbols into his victim's skin. Your brother's death was quick, Brennan said, advancing toward Marcus. Yours will be much more artistic. The FBI snipers had clear shots, but Brennan was using Marcus as a human shield, staying close enough that any gunfire risked hitting both men. Agent Hoffman's tactical team moved in from multiple directions, but the killer had chosen his location well. The open park gave him clear sightlines in all directions. What Brennan hadn't anticipated was that Marcus Henderson had spent 12 years thinking about his brother's murder, imagining this exact confrontation, and preparing for the chance to avenge Kevin's death. When the pathologist lunged with the scalpel, Marcus was ready. The fight was brief but vicious. Brennan had the surgical precision of someone who'd spent decades cutting into human bodies, but Marcus had the desperate strength of someone fighting for his life and his brother's memory. When FBI agents finally separated them, Dr. Michael Brennan was unconscious and bleeding from a broken nose, while Marcus was kneeling over him with tears streaming down his face. "It's over," Agent Hoffman said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Kevin's killer is finally going to face justice." As paramedics loaded Brennan into an ambulance and crime scene technicians processed evidence that would connect him to murders spanning nearly 2 decades, Marcus Henderson realized that his brother's investigation had finally reached its conclusion. The tattoo on his wrist, Kevin's infinity symbol, had served its purpose, leading him through a labyrinth of secrets that ultimately brought a serial killer to justice. Patricia Ruiz, watching the news coverage from her apartment that night, smiled for the first time since the Riverside case had ended her police career. Sometimes, she reflected, the smallest observations lead to the biggest breakthroughs. A simple glance at a customer's tattoo had cracked a case that had haunted Chicago for 15 years. The Henderson construction crew returned to work the next morning, unaware of how close they'd come to becoming victims of a killer's revenge. Danny Kowalski noticed that his boss seemed different, calmer, somehow, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. Marcus never explained the details of what had happened, but the tattoo on his wrist took on new meaning. It was no longer just a memorial to his dead brother, but a symbol of justice finally served and a family's long quest for truth finally reaching its end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.